Nonsense, that boy. He'll never make a monk. Kick him awake. Gently, Brother Caradoc prodded a pair of skinny young ankles with his foot. Rhys. Rhys. Wake up, Bach. He was a good boy in his way. Rhys, the novitiate, a lovely tenor. But St. Dunstan was right. The lad cared more for singing profane songs than psalms, and the other monks constantly berated him for it, keeping him busy to cure his idleness. Tired out now, he merely grunted and slept on. Well, well, let him rest. Caradoc began writing again. He hadn't yet recorded the fissure in the graveyard. Yes, he must put that in. For as he'd run from the quaking buildings, he had seen a deep hole opening up in the Abbey's burial ground between the two pyramids that had stood in it as long as time had gone. As if, he wrote, the end of the world had come, and the Almighty had sounded the last trump so that the dead might rise from their graves. "The book!" St. Dunstan shouted. "Caradoc, would you leave the record of our days to looters?" No, he couldn't do that. So Brother Caradoc put down his chalk, and though his shivers were becoming uncontrollable and the pain across his chest an iron bar, he made for the door of the chapel and began stumbling down the winding terrace of the tor. He knew now that the last trump had sounded for him, and that even if he couldn't save the book, he must die trying, or at least take his last breath in the beloved abbey that had been his home. A lot of precious breath it cost him as he wavered downward, falling over hummocks, his gasps sending sheep galloping, but gravity was on his side, and it propelled him down to the gate, which swung open at his touch under the chevroned Norman arch and into the ground. He staggered onward as far as the vegetable garden, where he collapsed among Brother Peter's lettuces, unable to go farther. Now he could peer down the incline toward the towering church. There had been damage. The old bell tower had collapsed, and gapes showed where some corners were sheared away. The waters that circled the grounds had not reached so far. Therefore the great book and all the relics of the saints would still be untouched. Beyond them, though, the village outside the walls was still and smokeless, its pasture littered with dirty white lumps that were the corpses of sheep. Caradoc experienced anguish for the drowned people and animals, for the ruined hayricks, cornfields. It would be a hard summer for the survivors, and an even harder winter. Yet holy Glastonbury still stood. Beautiful, beautiful it was, crystalline under the bright new moon reflected in its skirt of flood water, an island of glass, the island of glass. Sucking in breath that couldn't fill his lungs, he turned his eyes to the graveyard awaiting him. A flicker of movement caught his eye. 3 cowled figures were pulling on ropes that dragged something up the slope from the Abbey's great gate. Too far away for him to hear any sound they made, they seemed like ghosts. And perhaps, Caradoc thought, that is what they are. For what human could be abroad and busy in this devastation when even the owls and nightingales were silent? He couldn't make out what it was they were hauling. It had the shape of a great log or a canoe. Then, as the figures came to the fissure in the ground that the earthquake had opened, he saw what it was. A coffin. They were lowering it into the fissure. Now they were kneeling, and from the throat of one of them came a great shriek. "Arthur! Arthur! May God have mercy on your soul and mine!" There was a moan from the dying monk. "Is King Arthur dead, then?" For Caradoc, though a Glastonbury monk these 30 years, had believed that King Arthur was merely resting, waiting, until he was called to rise and fight the devil's hordes once more. And he rested here. Avalon was Glastonbury. Glastonbury was Avalon, the Isle of Glass, indeed, and Arthur slept somewhere among these hills, with their hidden caves and crystal springs. Arthur the Brave, Arthur of the Welsh, who'd resisted the sea-born invaders and kept the flame of Christianity.